Right now, there's a new drug by the name of TUCI in the state of Florida. When people cop the word from the dealers, they think they're getting methamphetamine or heroin or even fentanyl. But what they don't know is that the dealers have switched it up with a new drug by the name of TUCI. What is this stuff? And how deadly is it? TUCI, TUCI, Spice, K2, 2CB. Whatever you call it, this is the new drug on the streets of Florida, and I'm going to tell you why it's more dangerous than fentanyl. The fentanyl craze is almost over in Florida, and a new drug is hitting the streets by the name of TUCI. It's recently been made famous by the P Diddy Case, saying that it was one of his favorite party drugs. This drug is on the streets of Florida, and even the people that are taking fentanyl are afraid of this crap. The state of Florida is the epicenter for the consumption of this new dangerous substance. About 1/3 of the people who are homeless in the state of Florida who are users are using this substance. References in modern music. The song Lady Gaga by the artist Peso Pluma mentions TUCI and cocaine. It was possibly one of the most famous songs in the last year of regional Mexican music, but it isn't just regional Mexican music. In the United States, in Broward County, Florida, an artist by the name BLP Kosher made a song called Special K. Special K is one of the street nicknames for this new drug. You can see it mentions Coral Springs, Florida, highlighted in yellow, and also mentions Stretching the Work. Perhaps you've heard this song and didn't really recognize why it was called Special K, but there's clues in the lyrics about the song's true meaning. A song from a Chicago artist called TUCI mentions in the song, "Hey, we're in Miami." The drug of choice here is TUCI. So in popular music, as well as the news related to P Diddy, we're starting to see how this drug is starting to have cultural references in the state of Florida. But while the social media is portraying this drug as a drug of choice of the rich and wealthy, the truth is that even people on fentanyl are afraid of this crap because they're seeing what it's doing to people on the streets. So what exactly is this TUCI drug? We may have heard of it from music or from the P Diddy case, and we're wondering what exactly is TUCI and what exactly does it do to people? Not even law enforcement can agree exactly on what this crap is, because it's really a combination of different drugs that can be used in many different ingestion forms. It can contain benzos, which are like diazepams, things like perhaps Valium, or opiums like Tramadol. These are going to be prescription medications. And right now on the streets, with the fear of things like fentanyl, a lot of people are seeking those prescription medications that are real because they're harder to get and safer. Fentanyl can also be found in the mix, as well as caffeine. Can't forget the most important ingredient in this thing, ketamine, which is why they call that song Special K. That seems to be one of the key ingredients in there. But you can also have Molly, MDMA, and other types of drugs along those lines. It's basically a combination of different drugs. What may have been known in the past like something like a speedball, and they usually will also almost always have meth. What's confusing about this drug is that it can be closer to cocaine. You can purchase cocaine and it can be TUCI. You can purchase methamphetamine and it can be TUCI. You can purchase ecstasy and it can be TUCI, because it's all a combination of different drugs. Now in Baltimore, Maryland, there used to be a thing called Scramble, which is a combination of heroin, cocaine, and other drugs. It's something like that. It's like a speedball, it's like a scramble, but it's actually TUCI. It's just a combination of different substances. But what's making this substance ridiculously dangerous is the interaction that all these different drugs have amongst each other, especially when you get a combination of fentanyl in the mix or xylazine. Now, interestingly enough, the spice, the synthetic marijuana, is also known to be called TUCI, or of course K2 or C2, because again, since it's a combination of drugs, as long as you're combining drugs, it's some form of TUCI or TUCI or sushi. The names are endless. Special K if it's higher on ketamine. Regardless of what it is, you're now starting to find that this drug is more prevalent than fentanyl in some markets. So exactly what TUCI is very confusing because after all, it's a mix and combination, and even law enforcement with their laboratories, when they break it down, even they don't know what it is. All they know is that when they find a sample of methamphetamine, for example, it can have high concentrations of fentanyl, cocaine. When they do a drug test on an individual, they should see a combination of different drugs. In other words, it fades into the background and it's hard to tell exactly what this drug is. So when law enforcement finds a substance, they're going to charge the person with the most predominant illegal substance that they find in the mix, which means that this stuff has already been going around and mislabeled for quite a while in the state of Florida. They're not just slapping the charge TUCI on it. It's actually whatever illegal substance comes up with the strongest reading. You may see somebody being charged with the 5 different substances, as each substance being a specific charge, but it's actually just one single product. And sure, we may not know exactly what this stuff is, but we do know what it does to people, and this is what is being called the zombie drug. The stuff that just makes people go absolutely crazy. Whether it's the spice form or the powder form or whatever the ingestion method is. I know that sometimes a synthetic marijuana is the ingestion form. Other times it's mixed on paper with Raid, which is, yes, it is poison. It's literally cockroach rat poison. They use that to cut it, or xylazine. Whatever combination of crap it is, there are different forms of ingestion. And the only thing they have in common is the result. So what does this drug do to people? It has a particular effect that the other drugs perhaps don't. Now, the medical description for this is deassociation effect. It deassociates you or disconnects you from whatever it is you're dealing with. And that's an effect that many people who are deep into addiction seek out. The problem is that once you use this substance, sometimes the effect can be very long term. What are those effects? None of this is medical. I'm telling you my personal opinion based off of going into hundreds of interviews with homeless people in the state of Florida. Not a single one has mentioned the word TUCI on camera. So based on my on-the-ground experience of this particular drug, we're not talking about medical exploration or doctors, and we're going to talk a little bit about what doctors say, but I'm going to tell you what I see it does to people on the streets. The most common thing is something that we call fish eyes or wandering eye. It is where your eyes just go in different directions. If you've watched some of my interviews, you may have noticed how prevalent this is in Florida. Sometimes that comes from infections, but it's starting to really be linked to this thing called TUCI. It seems like, in my opinion, the people that I've met that consume this TUCI drug also happen to have fish eyes. So if you've watched my interviews, you may have noticed that many people have like the wandering eye here in Florida. That is a direct result of TUCI. It's one of its effects. How it does that to people, I have no idea, but I do believe that that is one of the most common things it does to people. The next thing that I've seen to be very common, and this is actually medically accurate to say, the first part, there hasn't been any documentation of that. That's something that I've noticed. But with doctors, we're starting to see that a lot of people get cancer. Now, you have a combination of different chemicals. From a medical perspective, I did a lot of reading on this subject, and if you look it up on the internet, you'll see it. It seems like that special K, that ketamine, seems to be the number one culprit in a lot of the cancer that's out there related to this drug. It could be the combination of different chemicals. It could be some other chemicals that we don't know are in there. It could be the rat poison. It could be the xylazine. It could also, of course, be the Raid, the roach killer that they're putting on this stuff to stretch it. Remember that song Special K? It talked about stretching the work. There's different ways you can stretch the product, and sometimes that includes adding some very harmful chemicals. So overdoses bring too much attention from law enforcement. And this is where I say that this particular product, this TUCI, is actually more dangerous than fentanyl. As fentanyl leads to overdoses that are trackable, and these statistics are showing up on the internet, it's not good for law enforcement. It's not even good for the dealers. But this TUCI stuff doesn't seem to be as noticed because the effects from TUCI are not an overdose death, but it is a long-term health deterioration. This can be professed in heart disease, which is extraordinarily common. If you've watched my interviews, you'll see how many people that I interview have heart problems.
Open heart surgery.
And that was caused by the addiction. Which particular? Okay.
Yep.
People think that's not the worst.
No, it's not. They're cutting here with dewormer. There's people dropping out here like flies.
It's that it's leading to a variety of different deaths that are not trackable. So it isn't just overdoses that are trackable like with fentanyl, but because the substance itself causes long-term mental health damage. These are the individuals that are getting hit by cars left and right. These are the individuals that are riding their bicycles in the middle of the road. If you've lived in Bradenton, Florida, you know what I'm talking about. It's a deterioration of people's mental health, not because of the immediate effects of the drug, but because of the long-term mental damage that it has. It sends people into mental health episodes similar to panic attacks. These individuals then think that it's a craving for more, or what they call a withdrawal symptom, and they go for more of this stuff, which leads to a never-ending cycle of abuse. And the crazy thing is that it perhaps isn't even a withdrawal effect. It simply leaves a long-lasting mental damage to these individuals. And these individuals are then getting killed by vehicles. These individuals are then having cancer from all the chemicals that are in these drugs. These individuals are also having liver and other health complications. They're getting infections and all types of weird staph infections and MRSA, combinations of infections leading to amputations that eventually lead to death. And all this, when they actually die from the variety of different things that are killing them, isn't being tracked numerically like a fentanyl overdose is. And that leads law enforcement to not be as proactive about handling this, because it's taking a law enforcement issue, right, consumption of illegal substances, and it's turning it into a public health problem. And that frees up law enforcement from having to deal with the problem. Now it's the EMS. Now it's the mental facilities. Now it's the hospitals. Now it's cancer treatment. The burden of a drug overdose falls directly in the laps of law enforcement agencies. But somebody dying from cancer, somebody dying from liver disease, somebody dying from an infection on their leg, somebody getting hit by a vehicle, all these variety of deaths, all that isn't numerically trackable like fentanyl. Thus, law enforcement is going to be much less proactive at going after this TUCI drug, because it's not the effect that it has in society, but it's the numerical damage that something like a trackable overdose does. Therefore, law enforcement simply doesn't go after TUCI dealers because it isn't contributing to the analytics that make law enforcement look bad. It's actually taking burden off of law enforcement agencies and putting it on other public health services. There isn't an incentive for law enforcement agencies to go after this drug, because this drug is making their jobs easier. It's putting that burden that fentanyl put on these agencies. For example, Pinellas County, Manatee County, Pasco County, Hernando County. You can't even mention these counties today without the first notion coming up: high overdose death rates. How can these law enforcement agencies even try to paint a good picture of themselves when their overdose death rates in these counties? Take Citrus County. It was up to 80 per 100,000. That means that their overdose death rate was 3 to 4 times higher than the state of California. When you have that massive of a drug problem in your community, these law enforcement agencies can't really defend the claim that they're having law and order like they want to portray. However, now with this new TUCI drug, these individuals are ending up in jails, they're ending up in hospitals, they're ending up in wheelchairs, they're ending up in mental health facilities, they're ending up being in the jurisdiction of somebody else's problem. And that's why I think this TUCI situation in Florida is very dangerous, because law enforcement doesn't care about controlling a drug problem. They care about the perceived identity of their counties in relationship to their very high overdose death rates. In other words, These people are dying from drug-related issues, but as long as it's not written down as an overdose, then they don't have to do nothing about it. So with fentanyl, we got to the point where 100,000 people a year were dying in the United States. Now law enforcement agencies are going to almost brag about the fact that, hey, these numbers are down now. We're not like we were before. We're in a better state now. Hey, look, everybody, fentanyl overdoses are finally dropping. You're going to start to see now in the near future law enforcement agencies in Florida start to brag about the fact that their drug overdose death rates are down. But in reality, things are actually much worse now than they ever were before. So when you start to see law enforcement agencies bragging about how they finally controlled the overdose death rates in Florida, don't believe that for a minute. They're still dying, possibly even disproportionately at a higher rate now than before. But now with these new drug combinations, instead of it being a trackable overdose, it's a bicycle accident, it's somebody dying in a hospital, or of course the prisons in the state of Florida, which have literally become more homeless than ever. Now, I'm trying to get you guys real information about the percentage of people in Florida's jails that are homeless. The numbers that I've heard are ridiculously high. It seems impossible to believe, but from what I understand, a huge number of the people that are incarcerated right now in Florida are nothing more than people that are homeless. So the homeless aren't in the streets, they're in the jails and prisons, and of course in the hospitals. So there's less people on the streets, and it isn't because they got their lives back together. It isn't because they overdosed. They're dying in new, different ways that are so diverse, it's difficult to really orientate them to one particular cause, drug addiction. Now, I don't know if you guys know this, but fentanyl that comes from the black market is literally no different than fentanyl that you would use in a medical clinic. It's the same exact formula. The problem isn't the way it comes into the United States. It comes from Mexico, from super laboratories, from precursors directly from China. So it actually comes into the United States as a fairly pure, clean substance that is, of course, dangerous, but it's when these idiots here in Florida do what's called stepping on it or stretching it, like that one song said. They mix it with Raid, rat poison, roach poison. They throw some xylazine in there. They put other substances in there, which I'm not going to name. It's causing a lot of death and destruction. It's leaving people mentally impaired indefinitely. You're starting to see many of the users of this stuff ending up with all types of different cancers, liver failure, and of course leading to amputations for infections in MRSA. Now, I keep track of many of the people that I interview over the time, and many of the people that I interview today, if you saw them on the streets, they've deteriorated completely. Back to that song TUCI, it mentions she losing weight, and of course that is one of the most common symptoms, possibly from the ketamine part of that drug, and it eats away your muscles, which leaves people not so much losing weight because of fat, they're losing weight because of muscle, which basically turns people into a walking skeleton, which is possibly the reason it's been called the zombie drug, because it literally eats away at people's muscle mass. It's a horrendous thing to the point where people have been on fentanyl for a while. The dealer switches them into this new stuff, right? Now the dealer switches it up. Now they're not on fentanyl, now they're on TUCI, and they don't even know they're on TUCI because, again, now the person thinks they're getting fentanyl, they're losing weight, they're getting infections, they're deteriorating, they're starting to get cancer, they're starting to have mental illnesses, they're starting to get that fish eye, the wandering eye. They completely deteriorate health-wise. And possibly we know that the situation at the border, things get difficult. So if one particular thing is harder to get, they can give a person a TUCI, a speedball mix of all these drugs. That drug, they can stretch it out. Like if they have one thing that's harder to get, let's say fentanyl's harder to get, well, they can just lower the percentage of the mix that's fentanyl, throw in that mix of all this other stuff, and the person's still getting a small fix. They're getting a high, so it confuses the user to think that they're still getting the original substance they thought they were getting, but now they're not getting it. So again, with a lot more security along the entry points for fentanyl and stuff like that, it makes it much more difficult for them to get the stuff they want. So that's possibly what this TUCI thing is involved in. And again, a lot of the overdoses were because they were trying to figure out combinations with the tizidine, with all the horse drinks, with all these different drugs that were out there. They were figuring out the combinations. It killed a lot of people, but I think now these people that were pushing the fentanyl before have figured out better combinations that they can push to people that are less deadly, more addictive, or perhaps simply more profitable, and they're not losing people to overdoses because the numbers of fentanyl and xylazine are down. With these combinations of drugs, they're making more money. Once the user has physical ailments that are terminal, they become more depressed. They start to consume more of the substance. Once they have physical ailments and mental disability that is obvious, they're possibly able to panhandle for more money. The depression combined with the ailment that is terminal means that these individuals start to consume at a much higher rate. Basically, the dealers that are pushing this stuff are creating a situation that is ideal. The person becomes terminal, they get more depressed, more desperate. Now they're not just using it once in a while, they're using it continually. And because of their ailments being so visibly appreciated, people become more sympathetic for the person, which means that they conceive more panhandling profits that are thus used to buy more drugs, making more money for the dealers. I know that sounds absolutely brutal, but this is the reality of drug dealing. It's like the more messed up these people get, the more they panhandle, the more sympathy you have for these people, the more desperate they become, the sadder they get, the more they consume. It means more profit for the dealers if they're dealing with somebody who's terminally ill versus dealing with somebody who is like a fentanyl user who can have some type of life and not have to be completely dependent on that substance. A fentanyl user is a lot more flexible. They can move from one place to the next. They can get up and do stuff. But when you get the people that are like this, that are kind of homeless, they're disabled, they're not able to move too far, then those people just become kind of a sitting duck for dealers. A lot of times these people also are able to get a disability from the government. Once their condition becomes terminal, they can get a disability. So on the first of the month or whenever they get their money, here's $1,000, whatever it is, right? And that money, they're going to use it strictly for consumption. So if the dealers can get 5 or 6 people sitting around dead on this stuff, a lot of people who are addicted are fueling their addiction with government SSI disability money. And one of the easiest ways to get that money is people who become terminally ill are almost guaranteed to get some type of help from the government. And then that is solely used by these dealers. It's almost to the point where if dealers can have 5 or 10 people sitting on a curb that are disabled, that is actually more profitable than an entire line of junkies wrapped around the corner. It's guaranteed. The money's going to be there. The individuals are completely terminal, so they're going to want that stuff no matter what. And this is just how deprived drug dealing is. Some of these drug dealers are almost as crooked as doctors and lawyers. So what these drug dealers are doing, let's put these people in a terminal health condition. They're going to receive government benefits. That means they're going to have funds, and now they're on the curb, disabled, and they have physical ailments, they've had an amputation, or they visibly look distorted, so people are going to be more sympathetic, giving those people more money. That money is guaranteed to fall directly in the hands of dealers. When people are terminally ill, people are much more sympathetic to helping them, and that leads the dealer in a situation where the person's now consuming large amounts of money, whether it's being fed from the government or being fed by the sympathy of people. All that money is going straight to the dealer at a massive scale versus a fentanyl user who has, a daily schedule of consumption. These individuals are constantly seeking that because they have a terminal ailment that many times has a lot of physical pain involved. So it really is horrendous what these drug dealers are doing to people. They're almost as corrupt as some of these big corporations. The big music industry artists are like a billboard to advertise these drugs, and they're pushing it as a pink cocaine. They're pushing it as a party drug, but in reality, this stuff is an absolute trap for people. And of course, we also know that very little studies or reports have been done on the effect of this TUCI drug. Fox News did a report on TUCI, and they said the Venezuelan gangs were pushing it. So they didn't really do a study on what the effects of the ailments on society. They just use it as an opportunity to continue to push their political narrative. Now the government's really going hard on fentanyl, and with the government going hard on fentanyl, they can switch it up into something that's a little bit more versatile. So again, ineffective law enforcement, ineffective policies, ineffective way to look at addiction now it's shifting into a larger health problem. And law enforcement in Florida and a lot of other states are aware that it's causing a health concern. So now they're pushing this mental health agenda. But the public in general doesn't really realize that music industry is marketing this stuff. Many law enforcement agencies are not going to be proactive about this particular drug because it's making their analytics look better by having less overdoses. It puts less heat on these law enforcement agencies to do something about the uncontrollable drug problem. But then there hasn't been any studies. Like, nobody's actually done studies on what exactly is this TUCI drug doing to people. Where is it leading people to? People on the streets that are homeless and vagrant and indigent, they know that this stuff does this. The people in the prison systems perhaps know what this stuff does, but nobody's actually done a comprehensive report on exactly what the effects of this TUCI drug are. And the people who have done reports, like the one we saw on Fox News, was mostly trying to push their anti-Venezuelan agenda. So here's a drug that doesn't really match too many narratives. It really can't be used for any agendas. It doesn't benefit powerful law enforcement agencies. It's being marketed by a music industry that cares nothing about people. The moment 3 or 4 songs that are getting played in nightclubs mention this stuff, it becomes socially acceptable now for people, and they try this stuff knowing nothing about it. I mean, there's one report on the internet that talks about some of the physical ailments that this drug has on people, but it's much more elaborate than that. They don't have answers to some of the ailments that this drug causes to people. So because they don't have answers to it, they simply ignore it. It isn't relevant to any agenda out there. I mean, really, the only thing we've seen about this on the news is Fox News telling people that Venezuelan gangs are pushing it, when where's even the evidence of it? The only reason Fox News even made a story about this stuff is because of the P Diddy case and the fact that it kind of matched their anti-Venezuelan narrative. So they make an article saying that Venezuelan gangs are pushing this stuff, but there's really no information to back that. The few cases that we've seen of arrests for this stuff, it's possible it's coming from Canada, it's possible it's coming from the Netherlands, but there isn't a whole lot of information on this subject. So there's not a lot of information. There aren't any real credible reports on this stuff. But on the ground, meeting people, I can tell you that at least here in South Florida, it is accounting for a huge percentage of the consumption by people who are chronically homeless and chronically addicted. It's to divert the public's attention and resources into mental health to handle this problem. Now we're blurring the lines between mental health and addiction, and it's a very confusing line to blur because many of the homeless people are addicted, but many of the homeless people have mental ailments. So now you have people that have mental ailments from their drug consumption. How confusing is that, right? Most of us in society are sympathetic to individuals who have mental health crises. We don't believe that people who have mental health problems should be treated like criminals. We think they need help. But now, if the mental health problems are coming from drug-related complications, where do you draw the line between mental health and addiction? That line is becoming very blurred, and it's going to make the task in the future of health in this country very difficult when we don't know the line between mental health and addiction. To be fair, I know this is a harsh statement to make. Law enforcement here in Florida does not give a crap about a homeless drug addict overdosing and dying. Many people in society are even against Narcan because they want these people to go away. That's their sentiment. I'm not saying it's right, but it's the way many people feel. So imagine now if people get hooked on this TUCI stuff and they start to die from it, and it's being mislabeled as mental health problem. The heat's not on law enforcement. But if you are homeless on the streets of Florida and watching today's video and you think you're going to get some weed or you're going to get some spice or you're going to get some fentanyl from your dealer or some meth, there is no more meth. There is no more cocaine. There is no more anything. What's out there right now is TUCI. And TUCI is going to give you cancer. It's going to burn a hole in your head. You're going to become a zombie physically and mentally. And you're going to run out in the middle of the road with a bicycle and end your life. And law enforcement is going to wipe their hands and say, well, it's just a homeless person who ran out in the middle of the road. That puts the rest of us in society in an interesting place. Blurring the line between addiction and mental health is where we are now, because now the addiction is leading to mental health complications. We're dealing with individuals who now have permanent mental health damage from their addiction. When we see somebody on the streets and they're mentally ill, we don't know if it's from the addiction or if it's actually somebody who has some type of defect from birth, and it's not really their fault. That blurring the line means that many people in society are just going to slap the label of addict on anyone who has a mental health problem, and as we know, that is a grave injustice from our society. But just so you guys know, particularly if you're a homeless person that watches my video, I hope that you listen to my message today. It is going to get very complicated on the streets. We know with the new administration coming in, it will be more difficult to get a hold of clean fentanyl from the Mexican, that's gonna go away, which means that TUCI is gonna shoot out of control. Law enforcement agencies are gonna proclaim victory over fentanyl and tell people that everything is okay and we finally reduced the overdose death rates in Florida and everywhere in America. But as the overdose death rates are going to go down and the law enforcement officers are going to raise their fists in victory and say we've lowered overdose rates in America, the reality is that more people are going to be dying from drugs in new ways than ever before. So if you're on the streets in the state of Florida and you have a vice, perhaps that vice might want to come straight from the liquor store or something like that, because everything on the streets is going to get touched. And even people that are vaping right now, a lot of the young kids think it's cool to vape, okay? A lot of people vape. These vape stores are the same sources where the K2 came from. It's the same pipeline of people. A lot of people in the marijuana industry today, right? Those big retailers, those people were originally in the drug market when it was in the black market. It was illegal. These people have connections to the black market. Don't think you can't buy marijuana thinking that it's recreational marijuana and they won't lace that crap with some TUCI for you, lace it with some fentanyl for you. Here in Bradenton, Florida, if you listen to police radio, you'll see all the time people thinking they're getting some weed, but they're really getting some fentanyl. It's going to be TUCI soon. And dosage is an aspect. They're not putting you on a high dosage. You might buy a vape or something and it could be 5%, it could be then 10%, 15%. I don't know where this stuff is coming from. It's obviously a mix. Law enforcement agencies believe that it is no longer coming from Mexico. This new mix of stuff is possibly coming from Canada via India or Asia. There's no real telling where this crap is coming from. There have been some pretty large busts in Florida, and there were some Canadians that were bringing this stuff down. They were, Indian Punjabis from India that had trucking companies through North America. So it's no longer just coming from the Mexican border. So here's another problem. They're going to crack down on the Mexican border for the fentanyl, which means it's more to be easier to bring stuff from Europe and Latin America into Canada and into the United States. And that will possibly lead to even a worse situation because now, again, it's just different substances coming from different places. You're starting to see a lot of stuff come from the Netherlands, come from Canada. It's more complicated than ever. So if you are a current user, you need to start thinking about your life because this isn't an overdose like before. It isn't like that. You're going to get cancer. You're going to get infections. Your eye's going to start wandering. You're going to burn a hole in your head. I already know people, I can tell you a handful of people that I know that I grew up with that today are dealing with these symptoms. They're dealing with prolonged, lifelong mental health deterioration caused by these drugs, these spices, these K2s, these TUCIs that have already been around for a while. Those same substances have left these people with lifelong ailments, and they basically fall back on their parents because nobody else in society is going to deal with somebody other than a mother that loves you. So you're starting to see now a lot of people as well having to come back to their parents or go back to living with their families in Florida because they can't afford to live out there by themselves. And add to that mix now somebody who has been destroyed by a physically debilitating drug that leaves you mentally impaired forever. Wandering eye, slurred speech, all that will become permanent. Panic attacks that are random and unpredictable. We're not making this stuff up. We're seeing this on the streets of Florida. The homeless people in Florida here who are using scary old fentanyl, even they are getting switched up on this stuff, not noticing they're getting switched. Their deteriorating health conditions are concerning, and it's happening widely. Now, this has already done a cycle. It's already been through a few waves. The reason it hasn't hit the news is because, again, you're not seeing the overdoses like when it was purely fentanyl. And even then, it wasn't really the fentanyl that was killing people with overdoses. It was the xylazine and it was some of the concoctions that were being brewed at the time that have now led to this new TUCI. And while the P Diddy case has got notoriety, we've heard people talking about TUCI. We've seen it on music videos. We're hearing it in music, and all types of genres of music are trying to portray this stuff as a cool party drug. It isn't. This crap is the most demonic drug that has ever existed. It is currently scaring people that are on fentanyl. So now you know if you're taking that risk. Before, people with fentanyl would get hauled away in an ambulance with an overdose and it'd be over for them. Narcan came, made a difference. People kept playing with fentanyl. Play with this crap. You're going to end up fish-eyed, full of infections, losing your muscle mass, becoming a living zombie, where eventually you'll become so obsolete you're just going to hurt yourself running out in the middle of the road at night. So that's what's happening, the reality of the situation. And sadly, when it comes to TUCI, we're not going to see the same attention as fentanyl. Now they're going to pretend like they're taking fentanyl and they're controlling it once fentanyl's phasing out, because fentanyl is phasing out. So now they're going to claim a victory over fentanyl when it's already on the way out, and there's something even worse looming, something that we're not going to see the effects for a very long time. And really, when somebody becomes mentally ill, they're indigent, they're homeless, they're mentally ill, and they get hurt like this, those are the types of stories that just don't garnish the same attention. And frankly, it doesn't even have any recreational value. It isn't like the other drugs that people have a good feeling that they enjoy. It simply just deassociates people as they prolong their certainly due death. It is kind of a on the way out type of drug more than on the way up. So it is a very dead end road once you get on this drug. It isn't like the other party drugs that people are actually enjoying. This isn't an enjoying drug. This is a drug that it's just going to deassociate yourself on the way out. And who wants to be in that position? It's absolutely hopeless. People get mad at me for making money on these videos talking about homelessness, but nobody gets mad at the dealers, who are the people that are really taking advantage of the homeless. Nobody gets mad at the music industry when they make these songs that are popularizing the destruction. So people are okay with the music industry promoting all this destruction. They're okay with the dealers pushing all this destruction. But then when I have an opinion about what's happening and make a few dollars on YouTube exposing the stories and the issues that affect people's life, I'm the villain. So that's the way YouTube works. The dealers know what they're doing, but they don't want everybody else in society to know how this stuff works, because they're making money in a very deprived way. And frankly, when somebody on the streets hits the point of seeking disassociation from everything, at that point, that person is hopeless and there really isn't much you can do for them. So just know that this is the reality of this new TUCI drug. Of course, the government is going to portray victory over fentanyl very soon, as it's pretty much on the way out. Not that it's going to go away, but that today everything is a combination of everything. And people who are into recreational and vaping, you guys are in the first grade. You guys are on track. You know, it starts with smoking, vaping, marijuana. It moves into meth. A few times you get your marijuana lace. Next thing you know, you're pushing into heavier stuff. So it starts with smoking. It starts with vaping. That's like the elementary stage. You're preparing yourself for your future. That, you know, you don't just end up looking for disassociation. You start off smoking, vaping, recreational. Next thing you know, you start to take some pills here and there. Then you can't find the pills, so you get them from the streets. You get your stuff from the streets thinking it's pure, it gets laced. And next thing you know, you're hooked on fentanyl. Next thing you know, you're on TUCI. Next thing you know, you're disassociating. This is how this whole thing starts. And you try to tell people, hey, don't get started. Don't start vaping. Don't start smoking recreational, because eventually it's going to lead you to this situation. But people don't listen. They think that they can control their addiction. They think they can manage it. I can do it on the weekends and it's not going to hurt me. But what they don't know is that they're not being informed about the dangers of their habits. The best way to stop is to never start, because once you start on this stuff, it leads you to the disassociation level right before death.